was asked to speak on what I think is going on with Taylor Swift and Jack Antonoff, and I have some thoughts on it, okay? I honestly think that Taylor Swift and Jack Antonoff are going through a strategic decoupling. I don't have any insider information, but I just have my own perspective, and I don't think that what I'm seeing between Taylor and Jack is a fallout or some kind of massive beef. I think it's a slow, mutually motivated distancing, or a conscious uncoupling, if you will. It's not like an interpersonal implosion, this is just what I think. I think that basically it's a creative partnership that is reaching its natural endpoint, or at least natural breakpoint, and I think Jack is an artist who has decades-long career ahead of him, and Taylor is an artist who is approaching an inflection point in her career, where she's right now focused on trying to hold on to that #1 apex predator in pop spot. But she's going to have a hard time truly positioning herself over these new girls rather than solidifying her legacy. And because of that, I think she's inevitably playing a game that she is going to lose, while I think Jack is doing what he has to do to preserve himself as an artist and a go-to pop producer in the industry. So I think that this whole kind of rift that people are sensing is created by shifting power dynamics, artistic self-preservation, and yes, perhaps there is an interpersonal friction layer on top, which I will address at the end, okay? So let's get started talking about this. So, I don't know if you guys know this, okay, because a lot of people are on this internet are young, okay, and they don't understand the fact that Jack Antonoff was in a band called Fun, and he also has his own band called Bleachers. He had a real career before Taylor Swift. We Are Young by Fun was a defining song of millennial generation. It was a very, very, very big song. And Bleachers is not a side project. It has always been a legitimate artistic project, and Jack is a legitimate artist. I saw him at Outside Lands. That bitch can perform, girl. He's no backstage man, okay? That's a performer, period. That's a front man. Granted, working with Taylor has dramatically elevated Jack Antonoff's visibility, but it's also kind of flattened his public identity into Taylor Swift's producer, or the pop girl producer who has songs that all sound the same or whatever, which I don't think accurately reflects the breadth of his artistry or his long-term ambitions, right? And I think to fully understand this, you need to understand a couple things about Jack's position as the main pop girl producer, right? 1989 obviously launched Jack into the pop stratosphere and made him more of a household name, but it was Melodrama with Lorde that solidified his position as the producer with depth and range, because Melodrama is an unassailable pop bible, one of the ultimate breakup records ever made, point blank period, okay? And his partnership with Lorde was incredibly productive. And, obviously there's this crazy PowerPoint that exists out in the streets where people were romantically linking them, and there's some talk about whether or not she broke up with him and Lena Dunham, blah, 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 blah. That's all gossip and nonsense or whatever. You know what I mean? That's not what this is about. But point being is that his work with Lorde really did solidify him, and then he went on to work with St. Vincent, and he'd already been working with Lana Del Rey, and he continued to work with Taylor Swift, and it really he really became the go-to pop guy. Unfortunately, with Solar Power, this is a moment where that album was not well received, and Jack Antonoff specifically, his artistry and his production work was questioned at scale. It was not just Lorde who received flack for Solar Power, Jack received flack for Solar Power as well. And I think that criticism, quite frankly, seemed to have soured their relationship because they did not work together on Version, And the reason why I want to talk about Lorde and Jack's relationship here is because I want to establish it as a pattern of behavior. That when Jack's artistic credibility is questioned through an artist association or their artistic failures in an album, Jack has a history of distancing himself, okay? And I want to establish that while getting into this whole Taylor Swift Jack beef, okay? So the criticism of the Taylor Swift and Jack Antonoff formula, I started to really hear it in earnest around Midnights. I personally loved Midnights. It's one of my favorite Taylor Swift's album. But I also think the sheer magnitude of the Eras Tour basically drowned it out. And basically she did end up winning AOTY. So it kind of muted, or at least put a damper on the broader discourse about Midnights being sort of repetitive and them reaching the end of their creative partnership or whatever people were saying, right? But I think when the Torture Poets department came out, that criticism really crystallized. And you saw a lot of magazines saying oh, Taylor Swift and Jack Antonoff have reached a logical endpoint of their creative partnership. And the second anthology part where she worked with Aaron Desert was so much better. And her and Jack, the music they did is so boring and blah, 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 right? Yes, Torture Poets department, Taylor Swift fans, loved that album. But, frankly, the album was critically panned, okay? And there's no way around that, right? The critics framed the album as being, redundant and derivative and not creative and not new and bloated and unedited and all of these things. And it made it seem as if her and Jack reached a creative dead end. And her relationship and the sort of diminishing returns of their creative partnership became kind of a focal point of the narrative, right? So I think that Jack's move after Tortured Poets Department is actually pretty intentional. It's an intentional repositioning rather than a coincidence, which is why you see him doing things like working with Kendrick Lamar on GMX. I think working with Kendrick Lamar on GMX really reasserted his range outside of pop and showed people that he could do more things that people actually predicted that he could do or really expected for him to be able to do, right? And it also got him the 4th Pokemon, and he's one of 4 people who've won all 4 major Grammy categories: Record of the Year, Song of the Year, Best New Artist, and Album of the Year, with him getting Record of the Year with Kendrick Lamar and Luther. And then he's also focused with Bleachers and recentered his own artistry. He went on tour last year, and also has been aligned with Sabrina Carpenter, which basically is positioning himself aside the industry's next commercial, successful, white blonde girl. Quite frankly, there always is one, right? And for a long time, it was Taylor. And quite frankly, the next heir apparent is Sabrina. Sorry. I think that in doing these things, he's starting to decouple his relationship away from Taylor and Taylor's reputation and her perceived artistic stagnation. And in doing so, it kind of centers the creative stagnation squarely on Taylor's shoulders, especially with how The Life of a Showgirl went. So after Torture Post Department was critically panned and people were talking about her and Jack, Taylor made the decision to not work with Jack at all on Life of a Showgirl in any way, shape, or form. And she pivoted entirely towards Max Martin and Shellback. But it did not really deliver the creative results that it appeared to aim for. She called it On New Heights an unassailable pop Bible, but that is not how it was received. And I think the outcome was exculpatory for Jack, right? Basically, it showed that the creative flattening that people were criticizing had less to do with Jack and more to do with Taylor herself. And I think that the absence of the project, his absence from the project, and the project kind of being received in a similar, if not worse way than Torture Poets was received, I think really worked in his favor by basically separating his artistry from her negative results, right? And I think at the end of the day, the thing that I think Taylor Swift is having a hard time wrapping her mind around is that the Eras Tour is a peak. It was not a plateau. There is no upward trajectory for her from Eras Tour. There's only maintenance, which is very difficult to do, or decline, or basically solidifying yourself, transitioning yourself into legacy. And I think from Jack's perspective, he's a man who is behind the scenes. He has a long career ahead of him. And I don't think that there's any purpose of him being exclusively tethered to an artist who's I know people may have a hard time hearing this, but whose time is quite frankly coming to a close. Like, I'm sorry to say, like, listen, Taylor is, I'm only a year older than Taylor Swift, so I feel like I can say this. Taylor is nearly 40 years old, guys. Like, she is, at the end of the day, gonna have to age out of this, like, little girl pop that she's doing. Like, she's not a girl anymore. She is a woman, okay? And I think that Sabrina is a forward-facing bet, right? I think Sabrina represents momentum, industry appetite, cultural relevance, youth, and a sound that feels kind of current and unique and fresh. And Jack's alignment with her basically reads as artistically and strategically future-oriented. And I think, honestly, I've been saying this for a while, but if Taylor were to make a grave error and create open conflict between her and Sabrina, she would lose Jack in that divorce. And I think the reason why she would lose Jack in that divorce is because Jack would be focused on preserving his own career, okay? Because, and at the end of the day, she's a diminishing stock and Sabrina is a rising one. Which, you know, maybe is a function of ageism and misogyny, but is also just the way of things, you know? And I also think that beyond just working with Sabrina and beyond all these things, Jack is making subtle interpersonal signals that I think are distancing him from Taylor Swift in a few different ways. One, he was very public and very harsh in his criticism of Ticketmaster and their extortive practices in music and in concerts, which is a very sharp contrast to Taylor's typically very money-hungry position and posturing, okay? He also is recently, there's rumored to be like working with Charli XCX on some kind of movie score, and this is after Taylor Swift like basically wrote a diss track for Charli XCX on Actually Romantic in Life of a Showgirl, which that kind of reads like a conscious de-alignment choice as well. And then also, you know, there is a lot of talk about Margaret Qualley's like visible discomfort around Taylor Swift at last year's Grammys, not this year's Grammys, which, you know, there might be some truth to that. I mean, like I saw the video, the body language is kind of funny, okay? So I do think that there is some level of interpersonal tension. And at the end of the day, like in my own personal experience, as a woman who is friends with a man, if the wife don't like you, you're not gonna have a friend for much longer. I'm just saying, you know what I mean? I also don't think that Jack's exclusion from the Eras Tour documentary was entirely accidental. So I think that all of these things hint at there being, in addition to it being like a strategic career thing, I do think that there's an interpersonal component of this beef, okay? Or beef or distancing, okay? Because I think that her not including him in the Eras Tour documentary was pretty strategic, in my opinion, because he came on stage with her in the same timeline that Florence and the Machine, Sabrina Carpenter, Ed Sheeran, and Gracie Abrams came on stage, but for some reason, Jack was just nowhere to be found. It was a little bit odd, and it felt pointed, you know? So I think it's a notable absence and aligns with the notion and broader pattern of intentional distancing. In conclusion, right, I don't think that they're in conflict for conflict's sake. I really think it's about timing, career trajectory, and self-preservation on Jack's part. I think what's unfolding between Taylor Swift and Jack Antonoff is basically, like I said, a strategic decoupling, and I think the alliances Jack is forming now is future-facing and not looking towards the past and trying to distance himself from being totally eclipsed by the all-consuming thing of being Taylor Swift's producer. So anyway, that's what I have to say about that. I hope you guys enjoy. I'll see you guys next time. Bye.